For more on this, we're joined by Advocate Sello Morajane, Director at the CCMA. Advocate, appreciate your time this afternoon. Now, walk us through that mediation process. I'd imagine it wasn't an easy task, considering that it's been 3 months since the strike action began.
Thank you very much for having us here. I was a bit surprised with the video I just saw that you played now, because part of the agreement that was made in the mediation process, because there's been different days, but the highest level engagements where I'm sitting in as the chief mediator with my commissioners, that is the last session that we had. And part of the agreement was that all parties that are involved in this dispute, because it's delicate, that the content of the discussion will not be fully disclosed except what we have issued in our media statement. In addition to that, we had agreed that we should not be making media statements from different sources because it's going to dilute what the dispute is and what the state of the dispute is. But directly to your question is that at the time when we had our first session on Monday, on that date, the mediation process was quite difficult, and we are not concluded, we are not resolved yet. Many things have been agreed, but there's good progress. So, yes, answering your question, the mediation was quite difficult.
So, Advocate, walk us through the point of connection, if you will, because I'd like to imagine that at some point the two parties then realized that they were to some degree speaking the same language.
Yes, thank you for that question, because then it will definitely clarify what the position is so that the public is not confused, right? Firstly, I prefer to call this not talking about the strike, because it is not just about the strike. It is about the entire dispute. The dispute is about a collective agreement which was entered into by the parties, which is Imatu, Samu, and the city of Tshwane. The content of that agreement is not fully implemented, which is what led to the dispute. This is public knowledge. This is what led to what we call a strike, right? Now, what is of importance, therefore, that in the foundation of that, there has been incidences of violence, intimidation, and all of those things, including damage to property. When you are engaging in a mediation process, you must always make sure that you don't negotiate under those circumstances. I can tell you now, which is my mandate from all the parties, is that each one of them, they denounced violence in all its forms, right? Intimidation and any one of those things. They said anyone who engages in such conduct must not be done in their name because they are not engaged in such activities. They are committed to the mediation process. They have subjected themselves with unconditional commitment to resolve the entire dispute that is involved. And that is exactly what the issue. There are a number of things, very good things, that have been agreed to by parties, and some of which they've started to implement. That is why when we issued the media statement, we could not have issued it without the consent of the parties. It was signed by all the parties. What was agreed is to protect this important progress until Monday the 13th. On Monday, we are going fully into that process in order for us to see if we can resolve the primary dispute. And the primary dispute has to do with the collective agreement which was concluded by both parties. That's where we are.
Now, Advocate, it might be too early to tell, but how long do you expect this process to take come up Monday?
You are correct. It will be difficult to tell, especially that you are dealing with mediation. You see, when it comes to mediation, you're asking a very important question. I always prefer to also educate the public. When it comes to mediation, the power to resolve the dispute rests with the parties who are in dispute. Then the facilitator or the mediator is the one that assists parties to see light about matters of mutual interest and the matters of mutual agreement. I am very happy that at this stage, many aspects which leads to the call for people to return to work are matters that parties have agreed on. But we can never say that the dispute is resolved until such time that the issues relating to collective agreement have been sorted out. Other things which are secondary, the issues, but extremely important, the violence issue and risk and everything else, there are a number of things which I'm not at liberty to actually disclose because that's what was agreed. Those things are foundational and extremely important. That makes parties excited about that. Our purpose is to say to the city of Tshwane and its residents, parties in the dispute want to resolve this dispute and they're committed. Number two, they do not agree to any form of violence, intimidation, either on property or on people. And three, that the resident of Tshwane, when they go to all its offices and all other points of services, they must do so without fear, without any exposure to any form of risk. The staff of the Tshwane municipality must be able to go to work with or free from all of those things. If all of that is done, and a number of things that have been agreed, we have to give hope because the public cannot continue not knowing if there is any attempt to resolve the dispute, whether there's any commitment by parties to resolve the dispute, whether there's any progress that's being made. I am hearing, confirming, there is good progress that I am happy about. There is no issue of violence. Parties have agreed on it. There's full commitment on Monday to resolve the dispute. But I can assure you, we will do everything possible with the kind of commitment we have from the parties that on Monday we throw in everything we can to make sure that we resolve the dispute. Because we must be careful here. If we talk about the ending of strike and all of those kind of things and we see that as success or the resolution of the dispute, it'll be one-sided. The strike is part and parcel of dispute resolution in a collective bargaining process. The conclusion and execution of a collective agreement as agreed by parties is part of that. If there are any problems, parties must resolve the problems associated with that. That is exactly what parties are talking about. When you say the dispute is resolved, let me clarify what that means. What that means that there's no violence, workers are back at work, services are being rendered without any fear or favor. Matters relating to collective agreement, which were agreed to by parties, is also resolved in whatever form or shape. That is the only time you say that is resolved. Is it possible for that on Monday? Absolutely, it is. If it means we move on to the next day or 2 days later to conclude that, the parties say, I must tell you, that's what they are prepared to do. And I have put all the resources that we have at the CCMA. That's why as director, I'm also leading the charge, because this is a matter of serious provincial, local, and international importance. You can never underplay issues of interest because there's workers who have interest to salary. There's a city that has an interest in running and delivering the service delivery. This is a balanced view. These are the balanced interests. If we say we're resolved, you must have that balance. If you don't have that, the dispute remains unresolved. But in short, on Monday, we could resolve the dispute entirely dependent on the parties, or a day or two or whatever day afterwards. But I do not foresee, in the light of where we've gone now and the commitment that we have and who is present in the room, we should be capable of resolving the dispute in a very short distance time.
Advocate, it's great that the two parties have agreed that there is no violence. But the issue is that there was violence that occurred during this strike action. And Mayor Celia Brink, if I recall, had talked about pressing charges or finding the culprits that either burnt property or destroyed some of that property. Now, what happens to those individuals in the context of this agreement? Is this something that has been talked about?
Yes, it has been talked about, but I cannot tell you what was said. Let me tell you the reason why I don't do that, because that, number one, I'll be crossing the line if I did that. Secondly, when you're dealing with mediation and when you're dealing with a dispute of this nature, where there has been incidences of violence and issues of damage to property, it's not new in South Africa. It's not new in the dispute that we deal with at the CCMA. It has happened many a times. You remember what happened to Isibani, for example. You know what happens in the security industry strikes, for example. There has been incidents where people are even killed. You know what happened in Marikana. But let me put it very plainly and clearly so that it be understood. When you eventually resolve the dispute, you resolve it together with its ingredients. One of the ingredients is this question that you're asking. You'll be asking one question. Now that during the course of the strike, Some employees were dismissed. Some employees did 1, 2, 3. Some of the employer's actions has been 1, 2, 3. So no one comes with clean hands. Part of the mediation is to resolve that too. At this stage, there is nothing that is mandated to be published about what will be done with that. It's going to form part of the package of the resolution of the dispute. We must make that very clear. Any other statement that people issue, it's a matter of interest and wish. But from the purposes of the CCMA dispute resolution process, to us, what it means, the moment parties agree, we pen that down to an agreement. That's when it can be published. And preferably, it shall be published by the parties based on the agreement signed by both parties. You see, in the world, in the country and here, no one wants to be in a position that we're at. But given the circumstances, it is not unusual for that to happen. Not that violence and all of it is encouraged, but it does happen. We must not be naive and think that those things don't happen. But there's a serious balancing act that needs to be done when you conclude such a dispute. So, answering your question directly, what has been discussed, what will be done? That will be discussed on Monday as part of the dispute when we attempt to resolve the dispute. Doing it and talking about it here, given the delicacy and the way we have agreed, we cannot at this stage talk about that. To me, that's very, very important to protect the mediation process until the dispute is resolved. We will fully publish, with consent of both parties, all the terms that are agreed that resolve the dispute. I'm asking you to help us to do so. At this stage, let's give hope. Let's support the process. Let's support the parties that on Monday, if at all possible, we resolve the dispute. But we must balance the interests of both the employer and the employee, because a mediation is not about winning. If there's any winning, it's the winning of both the employer and the employee. And that is the commitment that the parties have made, and that's the facilitation that we have invested in.
Advocate, my final question. In hindsight, what lessons have been learned from this dispute, and how can similar situations be prevented or handled more effectively, do you think, in the future?
Give power, recognition, and respect to social dialogue. That is extremely, extremely important. Secondly, we must never, ever forget to continue to build workplace relations. That is extremely important. That, to me, is the biggest lesson that comes from there, at least so far. I'll give you a much better answer once the process is concluded.
Advocate, appreciate your time. Advocate Sello Morajane, Director at the CCMA, just highlighting the progress made in the resolution of that dispute.